All right, behind the setup, episode 1. We're talking about what I'm using, why I'm using it, and why it's set up the exact way that it is. Let's dive straight into it. So I like changing my setup from time to time, and whenever I do, I always have some kind of a general layout or general idea in mind for that new setup. So when I changed to this setup, the idea that I had in mind was to have everything really, really low, first of all. That was the main kind of idea. And another thing was I wanted to have the rack toms inverted. So you've probably seen some people do this. For example, Annika Niles is a very famous example of this kind of tom setup with the rack toms. So instead of going 10, 12, 14, 16, I've switched them so it's 12, 10, 14, 16. So the rack toms are inverted. The reason that I do this is because I like to, I like the fact that it forces me to play the kit a little bit differently. It's a great way to pull out some new inspiration. If you're feeling a little stifled, you can't really come up with some new and interesting things behind the kit. This can help because it kind of forces you to play differently. None of your go-to fills, for example, really work anymore. As long as they're very tom-based, they're going to sound different because you have a different layout of the pitches of the toms. So instead of, like, imagine you're doing a tom run going from like the high to low. Normally, that would sound like this. But now instead, with the rack toms inverted, going left to right or high to low would sound like this. So I mean, that's not the end of the world. It's not a massive difference, but the pitches are now in a different order. So that's going to make you want to play the kit a bit differently. At least that's usually the case for me. I don't want to play the same kind of fills that now are going to sound different. Instead, I want to come up with some new fills or some new ways to play the kit. I also like the fact that it puts your 12-inch tom more directly in front of you, actually allowing you to bring in that ride a little bit because the 10-inch doesn't take up as much place on the right side here. So in my mind, when I'm playing this kit, it almost feels like a 1 up, 2 down because you have the 12-inch more in front of you, but you still have the 10-inch there for when you want it. So it just makes you approach the kit a little bit differently. So now, for the cymbal setup, the main idea here was to have a pretty minimalistic setup, but have everything really, really low. And as a result of that, in some cases, the cymbals are tilted away from me. So let's talk about that for a moment. The reason that I do that, the reason the cymbals are tilted a little bit away from me, like not drastically, but a little bit, is, for example, with this crash cymbal over here. If I want to hit this at the right angle, which for crashing it would be something like this, right? With the angle of the stick relative to the cymbal, I don't want to hit with the tip of the stick because that's not going to give me the full sound, and I don't want to hit too much from the side like this because that's going to crack the cymbal. So the perfect kind of sweet spot is something like that. So you can see if this cymbal was placed higher, let's say it was up here, when I play coming from above and down, as that's the kind of the preferred way that I like to play, from up and down, if I come from up here and I want to hit a cymbal up here instead of down there, you can see now my stick is pointing like this. So the cymbal, in order for me to hit it with the right angle, would need to be tilted almost this much towards me, like a pretty steep tilt towards me, instead of having it more horizontal or even flatter away or further away from me as I'm coming further down and closer to horizontal. So the closer to horizontal that you get, so i.e. the lower your cymbals are, usually the flatter you would have to have them, and sometimes again tilted away from you. So you can see the same thing with the auxiliary pair of hi-hats down here. They're actually even more tilted away from me because they're even further down. So for me to hit them at the right angle, they need to be at this angle relative to me. That's the general idea of the cymbal setup here. All of the cymbals follow that rule, and actually the ride too, you can see it's actually tilted towards me because the goal here is not to crash it. I don't want to hit it like that. If I want to, I can adjust the angle of my hand and still do that, but for the most part, I just want to hit it with the tip of the stick. So for me coming down, you can see it is at the right angle for me to do that. Actually tilted a little bit towards me. So depending on the goal you have in mind for each cymbal and the height that it's set up, and also the way that you play. Again, I play from above and down instead of coming more from in and out. Depending on all of those factors, that's what's going to make you set up your cymbals or in a certain way in terms of angle and height and position. So if I played more from in and out, almost more like boxing, this would be a totally wrong angle for me. You can see if I play more like this, now I'm hitting the cymbal completely wrong. I would have to have this even more tilted towards me for me to hit it right with that kind of play style. So you need to keep this in mind for when you're setting your kit up. How do you like to play it? Do you play from above and down or more from in and out? And do you like to have your cymbals low? Well, you might want to have them flatter or away from you, again, depending on how you play. So just keep that in mind when you're setting up your kit. And then the other interesting thing going on with the cymbal setup here is the hi-hat setup, because I actually have two hi-hats going on. So a regular, or a pretty big pair of hi-hats, and I'll mention all the models soon, but a pretty big pair of hi-hats over here, 16-inch, and then another 16-inch pair of hi-hats stack, kind of bridging the gap kind of thing going on over here, which is more of an auxiliary pair of hi-hats that's actually on a cable hi-hat system. So down here on the floor on my left side, you can see all of these pedals. These are ACD Unlimited Darwin pedals, and there's a cable hi-hat pedal over here, which has this cable going all the way around the kit, leading up to this hi-hat on the right side. So actually, I can actually control this with my left foot using the pedal over here, closing it and opening it just like a regular pair of hi-hats. So there's a really fun kind of interplay going on between these two pair of hi-hats on this cymbal setup. So that in combination with having everything low and the inverted rack toms and all of that makes for a really kind of interesting setup that makes me play differently. And again, that was the main goal of this particular setup. So let us now quickly go through what all the gear actually is. So let's start with the cymbals here. This is a pair of 16-inch Meinl Byzance extra dry medium thin hi-hats. And this is a 19-inch Meinl Byzance extra dry thin crash. (22-inch Byzance Vintage Pure Light Ride). And the auxiliary pair of hi-hats here is a Meinl 16-inch Byzance extra dry dual crash over a Meinl 16-inch Classics Custom trash crash. And then finally, the crash over here, which is actually a ride cymbal, is a Meinl Byzance 20-inch Jazz extra thin ride. So all these cymbals blend together to form this kind of dark and trashy and earthy kind of sound, which I really like when I'm trying to be a bit more creative and artistic, perhaps. I find that I can pull more interesting nuances out of cymbals like this, so that's why that's generally my go-to. But if I'm recording like a metal project, for example, like I did this summer, I recorded drums for a metal session work. In that kind of scenario, this type of cymbal sound is not really optimal, so instead then I used like pure alloys and Meinl Byzance traditional and Byzance brilliant cymbals, and those more kind of classic sounding cymbals because they fare better in that kind of setup. But when I'm trying to be a little bit, again, artistic, this is the kind of cymbal setup I like. I like that they all really, really blend together nicely. So the drums that I'm using is a Tama Star Classic Walnut Birch kit. Its sizes 10x7, 12x8, 14x12, 16x14, and 22x16. And then I'm using a Tama 13x7 SLP G maple snare. The kit, just a combination between walnut and birch gives it this really nice depth, but still a lot of punch and attack to it from the birch. So I really like that combination for the kit. It's the type of sound I like. I like hitting hard and getting a lot of tone out of the drums, but still having it be pretty controlled and pretty dark in its character. So that's really what I'm getting with this kind of setup, with this kind of kit. And for the snare, I always liked 13x7 snares. Just there's something about that specific size. You get the crack and attack from a 13, but you still have some depth behind it with a 7-inch depth. So the SLP G Maple 13x7, tuned pretty high, just hit it hard. It sounds so good. So the heads that I'm using is Evans all around. Evans UV2 over G1 clear on all the toms. EMAT heavyweight on the kick, and heavyweight over 300 hazy on the snare. The heavyweight on the snare and 300 hazy on the knees is always what I use. I know I get a lot of questions about the snare sound, like how does it sound that good or whatever. It's really simple. It's just use the heavyweight, hit it hard. You have to hit it hard. You have to hit consistent rim shots. Tune it pretty high, and preferably, again, for my type of sound, I like the 13x7. It just gives me the balance that I'm looking for. I really don't do a lot with this snare sound. I just hit it hard, tune it up, hit it hard, use the right heads and everything. It sounds so good. And as for the toms, the UV2s and all of that, they sound Really, really nice for the type of sound I'm looking for here. I tuned them a little bit higher than maybe you normally would. That's a general tip I would give you. Tune your drums a little bit higher than you think. They will project a lot better into the mics, into the audience, and out into the room, because the drums sound different where you're sitting compared to how they sound out. If you have them tuned really, really low, it might sound good where you're sitting, but you're only really getting the heads moving up and down. You're not getting the full drum to project outwards because there's not enough tension. So tune them up a little bit. I think you're gonna get a better sound out of them that way. That's what's going on with the kit. Finally, I want to mention the mic setup I'm using really quickly as well. So here I actually decided to put close mics on everything. I didn't want to do that originally, but then when I set everything up, I was just like, what the hell, let's just put a mic on everything, and that actually allowed me to dial in the balance really nicely. Recently, I've been going for a little bit more of a less is more kind of setup with the mics, but it is nice to have a mic on each drum because you can really, really dial it in. So the mic setup I'm using here is 15 mics in total. Again, you don't need that many. I like to when I can, but you don't need it. So the heroes of this this drum sound I'm getting now is the ribbon mics that I'm using, which I bought on Tama. These are Toman's own brand, the t.bone RB500 ribbon mics. You can see 2 of them up here. Then there's 2 of them over there in the room, in the Bloomline configuration as room mics. And there's a 5th one out in the hallway as just picking up the natural reverb out in the hallway. Those 5 ribbon mics are like 60% of this entire drum sound. They sound so good and they're not expensive at all. I really, really like them. Ribbons on drums are just amazing. Then for the close mics on the drums, they're mostly Audix. So Audix i5 top and bottom on the snare, Audix D2 on the rack toms, D4 on the 14-inch, and D6 on the 16-inch. Then on the kick, I'm using an AKG D112 just inside the porthole, and a Solomon Low Freak sub kick right outside of it to pick up that kind of really, really low sub frequency. And then I'm also using close mics on the ride and the hi-hat. These are AKG C391B condenser mics. I get almost everything I need from the cymbals in the overheads, but ribbons are pretty dark in their character, and these cymbals are also dark and not too loud. So for me to really get that last bit of definition, I find that I usually need to close mic the ride and the hi-hat for this kind of setup. But if I use a different pair of cymbals, like more brighter rock kind of cymbals, I probably would not need those close mics. But that's what's going on right now, and I think that should be all the mics, yeah. So, I think I mentioned everything. There's a lot of gear going on. There's a lot of kind of behind the scenes of what you hear and what you see. I think I covered everything. If there's anything you want to know, any questions you have gear related to this specific setup, please let me know. I will make more videos like this. Whenever my plan is, whenever I change the setup drastically, I'll try to make a video like this if I have the time and the opportunity to do so. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.